Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Real Spill, a podcast where I spill on all things multifamily advocacy and how we as industry professionals can work with our elected officials, stakeholders, and allies to bring about change for the rental housing industry. My guests are subject matter experts whose unique perspectives will help listeners understand how the issues impact them. Let's get into The Real Spill. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Real Spill here on the Multifamily Media Network. And with me today is my sister in advocacy, my friend Sheri Druckman. Welcome, Sheri.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Katie, for having me on. It's so good to connect with you.
Yes, you too. We had talked offline a minute about this being a coast-to-coast podcast. I'm
East to west.
Yep, I'm in South Carolina. And can you share your background and tell those who don't know you where you're coming on from today?
Well, I originally grew up in the Midwest in Iowa, and I landed in Seattle in 1994, which is when I started my career in multifamily, just falling into it out of the blue as a temp job. And that really gave me an introduction to all of the different asset classes. And from there, I joined Trammell Crow Company, and talk about having a great foundation for building a career in real estate. And I really fell in love with just being able to have an opportunity to create a home for people and all of the different challenges that it brings every day. And so I've held many different roles. I specialize in lease-up, development, renovations, and operations, of course. So that's 30 years. Fast forward, here we are today.
That's awesome. It does go by very fast.
It does. Right now, I'm the regional vice president for Legacy Partners, and I oversee the operations for the Pacific Northwest, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, and Wyoming.
So you guys have mixed use too, where you do some commercial, some residential.
We do mostly, for me, I'm overseeing our residential and mixed use with a retail component.
That's awesome. I think things start in the West and then they find their way over to the East Coast and especially to the South. And that was something that was a new concept for us years ago. And for those who don't know, if you have that mixed use component, you're responsible for the lease agreements, not only for the residences, but for the businesses as well, right?
That's so funny that you just brought that up, because our newest project in Redmond, Washington, we have 32,000 square feet of retail. That's the most I've had on any project. And we just had a retail meeting yesterday. There's so much more that goes into managing your retail tenants along with your residential residents for the multifamily component. But I think that it really adds to creating a thriving community for people where they live, work, play all in one spot. And Legacy Partners is really motivated and concentrating on a lot of TOD sites, transit-oriented development. And so that also brings light rail right into the community where people don't necessarily have to own a car. They can just hop on the light rail, but everything is there for them. So having that extra retail component is, it just really completes the project and adds to the community.
It gives people time in their day back that they're not spending on the commute.
Right. And it's just so many more added amenities to draw people to want to make your community their home.
Before I left on site in 2021, it was people wanted to be alone with people. Just providing spaces.
That's COVID, right?
Yeah, yes. The part of the Great Resignation there was take my keys.
But they want to work solo, but in an environment where they're around other people. You know, we're designing that in our communities right now, so much of that. So the workspace where people can come in and have a nice spot, put their headphones on, but still be around other people while they're working from home.
I think if we can take, some positive things away from the pandemic, it showed that a lot of industries can survive with a hybrid work environment or with people working remotely. And then you sometimes, I work remotely now too. Sometimes you have more work-life balance. Sometimes you find yourself working on things at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, but being able to have a change of space, being able, hey, I'm going to go downstairs. I'm going to go into the lobby or into one of these shared workspace environments and get some work done.
Just having that flex space is really important.
And so we were talking about this offline too, through our mutual sister in advocacy, Victoria Cowart.
Yeah, she's so amazing. Yes, a
Yes, we
great
had
connector.
very much so. And our first meeting, we were in a selfie together.
I recall. And you and I hadn't even known how much passion we each share for advocacy and creating really great legislation for our industry until Victoria connected us.
Exactly. And she helped me find my way into this and helped me develop my passion. When did yours start?
She helped me also, Katie, because I had been involved in our government affairs committee locally for the Washington Multifamily Housing Association. But at the National Apartment Association, I had become a committee member for the Ledge Committee. But it was Victoria, who was a former chair of Ledge, who really helped guide me in how the committee works and how to get even more involved in chairing the subcommittees and having even a greater voice. So she's really made a huge impact on influencing us to pick up the torch.
She has, absolutely. It's hard to listen to her and not have something in you just start turning like, oh my gosh, they really do want to hear from us and they do want to have relationships with us. They are not the housing policy experts. We are.
They need our voice. Yes. That's what I also echo to all of our members across the state and throughout the country is, they are in a position to create policy change, but they can't do it well unless they have our input. Like you said, we are the experts. We're the boots on the ground. They need us to help educate them to enact great policy.
And we have the opportunity to do just that here in just a few short weeks with the Advocate Conference.
We do. And here in Washington, even starting right now and leading up to Monday, which was this past Monday, the 13th, was the start of our legislative session this year. And right out of the gate, just a few days before session opened, we received the notification that a rent control bill was going to be introduced into the House day one at 1:30, right after the opening remarks. And we've been preparing as we do each year, but it just shows you how much those conversations need to be ongoing with our senators and our reps and anyone in a position to create policy change so that we're really prepared when it's actually on the docket and in the House. And
now, do you guys have a volunteer government affairs director on the state level, or do you have like a paid lobbyist? Like, what's and every state's different. What's the makeup?
Yeah, we have both. So we have an official government affairs committee where we have a designated government affairs director, but we also have state lobbyists that partner with us, not only for the Washington Multifamily Housing Association, but also in the coalitions that we have developed. I'm chair of the Partnership for Affordable Housing, which is a coalition specifically geared to thwarting rent control and educating our policymakers on why rent control is so damaging to our housing production. And then, so we also have lobbyists on our board and helping us with all of our efforts in Olympia, which is our state capital.
And that's wonderful because, as you said, with having rent control bills filed as soon as they could be in the state, it's going to take the collective efforts of everyone to effectively kill that type of legislation.
That's right. And be prepared to testify and present your opposition and your testimony, and whether it's in person or online, to just, like you said before, take action. It's about action. Our voices need to be heard. We need to be able to inform all of the groups involved so we can help shape better policy.
Yes, and we talked a little bit too about the legislative committee, which you are a longtime member of, and I'm returning to this year. And I'd forgotten, because I haven't served on it since 2021, that the Ledge Committee actually sets the priorities for the Advocate Conference, and they're presented to the board. Will you tell listeners a little more about that process and about the capacity that you're serving in on the Ledge Committee this year?
Yeah. Well, I'm really thrilled because as you mentioned, I've been a board member for many years, but last year was the first year that I had the privilege of chairing one of our subcommittees. We have two subcommittees. That's the Advocacy and Engagement subcommittee and then Policy and Regulatory subcommittee. So this year I'm chairing the Policy and Regulatory subcommittee, and we are instrumental in shaping what are our top initiatives going to be and how do we then roll that out to our membership group so that we can get a collective efforts and preparation for our advocate and day on the hill and those conversations. And so a couple of things to note about that. I'm back on the advocacy subcommittee. We've always had a strong effort to engage and have members take more action to step up and advocate. But last year, we had a really exciting new program that was implemented called the Advocacy Academy. And essentially, there were nominations for people who wanted to be part of this cohort to get a really advanced education on legislation and advocacy and how to create key contacts with your senators and reps and legislators and representatives. And so there were folks that were chosen, and I want to say about 25 folks or so out of nearly 100 who had applied. And they went through an intensive program to learn how better to do that. And these are people who are already engaged. It's just taking it to the next level. And so I know you have a lot of really great relationships with your local senators and reps. And that is what this program is designed to do, is to help people make it more actionable and engageable and really establishing those relationships.
It was so cool to be part of that. When I got an email, I don't remember if it was from Seth Turner or from Jim Wilson, saying, "Hey, Katie, we'd like for you to help educate our Advocacy Academy. Would you be willing to come to the Rawls conference and help us by sharing with the students how you were able to effectively develop relationships and become a key contact for three of the members?" And the people, Sheri, they were just the stories that we had there. When I tell you, like, I'm going to have a few of the students on to the podcast, it's amazing the time and the effort and how serious they took it. They had homework. They had to go and learn how to, I called it the art of storytelling. You know, I'm a big hip hop fan, and that is it's a song by Outkast, and it's called the art of storytelling. But that was my hashtag, because there is an art to it. There's different components, and Seth put so much time into it, and with Greg and Jim, and then we had some of our lobbyists there. You think we're going to do it again this year and have a class of 2025?
I would say for sure. I know we need to gear up for what's on the docket for 2025, but I absolutely would imagine. And so I am so glad that you had the opportunity to do the instructing. And you know what would be great is if you get that cohort together when you're at Advocate for, a special reunion and updates and so on. So
I think so too. And two of the participants, two of the students, are our graduates now, Harriet and Tess. They are from New York, and they just happened to be in the training at the Advocate Conference last year that they did kind of downstairs, where they were just pretending, like we were just all role playing, and they ended up with my group. And so when we met at the Rawls conference, it was somewhat of oh, hey, I remember you guys.
yeah.
And just hearing the stories, like we've got members who overcame poverty and homelessness as young children, or, these were women in this situation, young women to become property managers. So they went from being homeless to helping people find their homes. And
Well,
oh,
talk about full circle. That's
oh gosh,
powerful.
it was. And just, it was hard to pretend as though I was a representative when I was hearing their stories, because your human side wants to come out and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's
Well,
amazing.
you just gave me goosebumps about that. And right there, that is what is most compelling when we're having those conversations and speaking with our policymakers, because that's what really drives change, is telling people those stories, why it's so important to create initiatives that help our housing affordability crisis. And those specific stories are what make all the difference.
Yeah, and people don't think sometimes that they have a story. Like if it's around a bill, like the Section 8 bill is one that we use as a talking point, because it's been the hardest, really and truly, to get any support of. I think right now we had like what, 7 co-sponsors. It wasn't a lot, and I'm in a very red state, and so you talk about a government program for assistance with a Republican. Sometimes it's like you're insulting their mother, where you're like, oh, clutching your pearls, or they're clutching theirs. And it's like, that's not the case. The people that would qualify for these programs are sometimes your teachers, your firefighters. Wages have not met what the cost of living is in a
Not
lot of
even close.
areas. No. And that gap, and standing in the gap. But they were told to go to their room that evening and come up with a story. And I had one from one of my residents who'd moved in, and she said, I'm on a waiting list for a voucher. And I didn't realize that when they're on that list, when you get approved, you have a very finite amount of time to apply that voucher, or else you're going to lose it. And I
You go to the back
remember,
of the list.
yeah, she came to my office and said, Katie, a place opened. I got to go. And I said, hey, you're good. Like at the time, this was like probably 2019, 2018. I had a waiting list. So I was like, girl, hand me your keys as soon as you can. Put it in writing. Let's do it. Let's make it legal. But put it in writing. Hand me your keys. I can stop billing you for rent the day you turn in or rent and utilities, and just bill rent until a new resident takes keys. Because in South Carolina, the current leaseholder is responsible until a new leaseholder takes possession. And saving her a lot of money, allowing her to take advantage of that program. But there were so many people. She had to find something. I'm talking 2.99999 times the rent. I'm going to round it up to 3, barely squeaked by at my property. And I know that she had to make sacrifices to put food on the table for her children.
You know what? That was so powerful that you were in a position to really help her personally. And that's us as housing providers. That's what we all want. I wanted to talk, you're making me have a great interjection here about some really great progress we made last year with the Affordable Housing Committee, which I
Yes.
had the privilege of chairing. Such a rewarding opportunity. And we had an opportunity to really dive really deeply into the housing choice voucher program and how we can improve the relationship between our operators and owners and our public housing authority, because sometimes there's a disconnect and there's delays on if when we have an availability but we need an inspection, and how the program is ran. Like you said, just having more robust support for the program so more people can take advantage of it. And we had the privilege of having Monacchio from HUD come and participate. And I'm telling you, Katie, if were you in that meeting, we could have gone on for hours and hours on the discussion, on information from people sharing on ways that we can improve. And there was so much great dialogue between HUD and us as program or operators, and then the program housing authority representatives. And so I'm really hopeful that we can also gain a lot more traction this year on housing choice voucher. But that was really probably one of the biggest highlights of this past year with our affordable housing committee work.
Yeah, I agree. I was very fortunate to be able to participate in one of his visits for the Greater Charlotte Association.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
their government affairs. She's not with Greater Charlotte anymore, but we're still very good friends. Lindsay Reeser. Sidebar: Lindsay and I met because she was the scheduler for my congressman.
Oh,
so, so I had been communicating with her about our fly-in, and that's another thing I try to do on this podcast too, is to let people know the lingo. Like when we go to advocate, the people that are scheduling it, they know it as a fly-in.
uh-huh.
So if you're scheduling it, feel free to use the lingo. They're going to think, oh, this person's they're hip to the game. They know the word, they know the verbiage. But Lindsay and I were communicating, and then all of a sudden, because our firm is part of course, the Greater Charlotte Association, we get an email, welcome Lindsay Reeser to Greater Charlotte. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we already know each other. So
Oh, great.
yeah, we were fast friends. We attended Advocate together that year because we share Ralph Norman, South Carolina's 5th district, because some of it's York County, which is Greater Charlotte's area and upper states. Had a great time. So when they were scheduling their visit, their property tour with Monacchio, she invited me to come up. And he was going to come on the podcast, but with the change in administration, we're going to have a different PDOS in that respect with the new administration.
Oh, right. This next time. But I was happy to see how well it received. Our information was from Monacchio, and how much that's going to just lend to enhancing the program when that's all taken into consideration. When you said that you got that letter and you're like, wow, I already know you. What's so great about getting deep into advocacy year over year and establishing those relationships is when you have that personal connection and your voice has that much more weight, let's just say. But then also when you run into your Congress representatives and members of Congress or reps and senators outside of your meetings. Like I have multiple times on flights from here to DC ran into ours, and it's so great to have those side chats outside of an office meeting environment, because you already have those relationships.
Yep, it's so neat. And getting involved, whatever your political party is, getting involved on the local level has also been instrumental for me because, we had elections this past year. So go into the debates and just getting that time. And I had a weird situation. My state representative ran against my congressman.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, and it got heated, like to the point, and this is the real spill, and I'll tell you what really happened. I was at a meeting, and they were debating, and it was going like, I was like watching a tennis match. I'm like, oh my God, they're going to fight. Like they might fit. Like this is getting like very tense. So I told my husband, do we still have that tequila? will you put it in the freezer? Because I am going to need it after this. And I was texting Victoria because it was a partisan thing. And our upper area, this area of the state has some inner fighting. And so I'm like, is this normal? I don't know that I can come back to this. This is a lot of drama. Like I thought coming to the supplier side, I don't have the need to consult my alcohol as much anymore as a crutch. But oh Lord, if this is how this is, I don't know that I can do this and not go home and have to have a shot of something. But she said, no, that's not normal. That's just particular. She explained to me what was going on, but being able to be there for the congressman, but you have to skirt that line because if my state representative had won, it would be weird if I was there in support of, but I really was there, but he didn't win. I was there in support of my congressman.
That's a great example, Katie, of why it's so important to really, truly be supportive. Last year, we had a very, very strange occurrence here in Washington State from aggressive behavior against Annette Cleveland. And she was a real pro-housing support for us and upholding why rent control doesn't work. And she received threats. She had to move out of where she was. It was nearly violent. It was completely awful for her. And we rallied around her and supported her. But for her to have to go through all of that and her family was devastating. And so So, they're on the front lines, and we're needing to be there holding them up and supporting them for all of the right reasons. And it just shows you these couple of examples how heated and intense it can really get, but how much more important it is too that we are equipped to help really support them and the cause.
Oh, yeah. And if folks are interested in, if they're just starting their journey, like, I don't know how I'm going to get started in this, what advice would you give them? Like, how should they get started if they're listening to this and they're like, hey, this is something I'm interested in?
Well, number one, start locally with your state association. So we know each other through the National Apartment Association, and every state has their association that rolls up to the National Apartment Association. So if you're not already a member, find out who your association for your state is and get involved and right on a local level first. Most associations have what's called Day on the Hill, and that's the opportunity for advocates and members to come together. And when I say advocates, then you are immediately becoming an advocate if you get yourself signed up and go. And don't worry about not knowing whether you know what to say. There are meetings and programs set up to help equip you with usually the top 3 initiatives that we want to try to promote for our industry, and you'll be equipped with that information. And then that is taking all of the unknowns out of how do I get involved right out of the gate. There's also probably some different type of coalitions that you can learn about and raise your hand to get involved with. But I think starting on a local level first is a really great way to go. And tell us, is that how you started, Katie, on a local level, or how did you start?
Well, Laura Hart Williamson was on the board. Laura's with Furniture Services Incorporated. I'd known Laura for over 20 years. I'd been involved in the industry since 2002. I was 18, leasing consultant, and just needed to use the landline in the leasing office. And the next thing I knew, the property manager was like, hey, you have a great professional phone mannerism. Do you need a job? And so my thoughts of being a civil rights attorney is what I really wanted to do, kind of shifted because this checked the legal stuff. But you get so involved on the property and you just work, and then don't realize you're part of something so much bigger. I didn't know we had a board. I went to the meetings. I just thought the people that were up there speaking drew the short end of the straw that day because the short straw and had to speak in public. But Laura had told me, or somebody had nominated me for the board. And I didn't meet the requirements because I hadn't attended enough either monthly meetings or committee meetings. So I said, okay, let me sign up for some committees. I hadn't signed up for government affairs because I didn't know what they did. And I thought it sounded boring. I'd not met Victoria yet. This was like maybe 2015, 2016. And Laura said, hey, she called me. We have a government affairs committee meeting tomorrow at 9 and looking forward to seeing you there. And I'm like, Laura, I didn't sign up for government affairs. I signed up for our awards, excellence awards, to help plan, plan parties, resident events. That's fun.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I just think you'd be good. You should consider it. And I went, and then of course they put on events like Champagne and Diamonds, which is a PAC fundraiser. And I heard Victoria say, reach out to your representatives today. Don't wait another day. She's like, pull out your phones right now. Go to this website, put in your address. And I did. And then my congressman was a state senator. So I put in local on the state level, and I was like, okay, William Timmons. I'm hoping to have William on in a few weeks too. But it was William. And when my son's 5th grade class went to Columbia, South Carolina, our capital, for their visit, William came down from the Senate chambers and took a picture with Jackson's class. And it was just perfect timing because Trey Gowdy was vacating the 4th congressional seat here in South Carolina, and William was running for it. So he used that picture of Jackson in his class for his Facebook banner for his campaign.
You did? Wow.
Yeah. So we became buddies. And then when he won the 4th district, I would go to the debates, I'd go to meetings here in town, and we'd see each other. And eventually, when Mike Holmes was inducted to the chairmanship here in Greenville, South Carolina, someone said, you know that there's a there's national committees. I didn't even know that at the time. They're like, you're so involved here. See, we didn't even have a state committee. We did not have a state government affairs committee until 2023.
Wow.
Yeah, we have a lobbyist, and she's amazing. She's on maternity leave right now with her sweet baby boy. But we have a wonderful lobbyist who works for Capital Consultants, but got involved there, and they tapped me to be the first ever chair of that committee. So you just, you put in the work. And the way I look at it is, like, William hadn't gone back on YIMBY. You know how sometimes they have to go back on it the next year?
Yes.
Well, I'd been talking to him about it, and I saw that there was an event coming up that I could go to. Well, I've been emailing him, and I sign up for the bill alerts. And if people don't know, you can do that on congress.gov.
Yep.
You can sign up for alerts if anything changes. And I just kept waiting after our meetings to see that he had co-sponsored again. And I just showed up at this event. I didn't say a word about YIMBY. You know what I saw the next day? An alert from congress.gov that William went back on it. So it's like you work until you don't have to introduce yourself anymore, until they know who you are and why you're there and what you represent. And we want them to think of us as the expert. Like, hey, I don't know housing that well. Let me contact the folks that do. And so it just, seeing how it worked and relating it back to youth in government when I was in high school. It's a program through the YMCA that a lot of high schools have, where you can be an attorney pair, you can be a committee chair, you can be a page. They have their own youth offices. And I was a bill writer for 3 years, and one of my bills made it into youth law, and the other two, I forgot a provision, so they got vetoed at the youth governor's desk.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh, this works like youth in government. If you think about like your simple civics, and
Yes.
it just made sense, and it's something I absolutely fell in love with. For those of us that are nerds, like our kind of nerds, it feeds something inside of you that you didn't know that you had.
That's well said. And it's funny because I didn't realize that I had such a passion for legislation and policy until I was well into my career. It wasn't really until, I want to say, 2014 or so. And I was really gravitating in my early career to the committees that were more social, like the marketing and any kind of other outreach programs like that, because I didn't feel qualified enough to be government affairs related. But I think as my passion grew to make sure we need to do something, we need to take action, because I believe it's a privilege, but I really also believe it's a duty as experts in our industry and veterans in our industry to do more than just to do more with the knowledge that we have. We need to use it to better our industry. And the only way to do that is to advocate and get involved and educate the policymakers who are in the position to do that. So,
and it's going to be exciting over the next few weeks to see our 2025 priorities for NAA come to fruition, and to start educating the members. Another thing that the Legislative Committee does is formulate position statements. Can you tell listeners a little bit more about that process?
Yes, so you might see on social media or the websites when a statement comes out from the National Apartment Association, a lot of times in conjunction with the National Multifamily Housing Council, NMHC. And that's where we come to a collective agreement on how we want to word and pose our position as an industry on certain topics. So it starts with a policy and regulatory committee and the board members, committee members, and we really evaluate what's going to be the most effective and represent the housing industry at large. And so we talked about, we're really looking forward to diving into our top initiatives. And you mentioned YIMBY before. I'm a huge proponent for pushing through YIMBY on every level as well. And also the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And then locally, of course, thwarting any type of rent control and rent stabilization or rent caps. But yeah, back to the policy and statements. That's typically how that works.
And if people aren't involved, they may not know. They'll just see it coming out. But if someone's interested, like now I'm in Region 4 and we have so many volunteers, it's hard for people to get a spot on committees. And even this year, I just happened to run into Kurt Kanabe. I wasn't chosen. I just happened to run into Kurt. And with what I do now, like my title is Legislative and Regulatory Program Administrator. And so I showed him my badge in Atlanta and I said, I need to be back on this committee. This is literally what I do. Like I watch C-SPAN and keep our partners and our clients and team members updated on what's going on. And so I got a chair's appointment. So I feel especially honored to be back here this year. But if folks are interested, the application goes out in like June or July to serve on an NAA committee.
It's early on, and then decisions are made in the fall.
And it's exciting. And even folks that want to get on like an EI committee, which that I'm on the RPM Careers Committee this year for EI. And there's more opportunities to serve there too.
You know what? That's right. And there's so many different opportunities. There's, depending on what your passion is, I would say for folks to really take a self-evaluation, find out what moves you, what drives you, where are your passions as it relates to housing, and then gear your volunteer work towards that, because that's what's going to feed your soul and that's what's going to help you be the most effective. When I first started out on a national level, I was joining the marketing and communications, Marcom committee, but I also went through the program that's called Leadership Lyceum. And what a rewarding experience it is to go through that. So I would highly encourage people also to look into Leadership Lyceum.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It gives a great overview. I have several friends who've gone through it and very proud of them for doing that and taking it. It's a step in your career. It's continuing that duty, learning more, learning how to give back and being able to be a voice. And for folks who maybe don't get on a committee, there's room, and we've got to have more room in the ledge room. Oh my goodness gracious. And that committee meeting is 2 hours long, but it goes by really quickly because we have so much to cover.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. But you can go and sit in the gallery.
Yeah, you can. That's a great point that people should know. If at our annual conferences, when we have our committee meetings, you have a seat at the table if you are a member or a committee member, but you always have an opportunity to sit in the room, to listen, to hear, to absorb, and can have conversations with folks after the meeting. But that's a really great way to have a good understanding from a national committee level if you're not actually assigned to one of the committees.
And the education that's involved in that, like you learn so much just by sitting in the gallery. And I learned, I was in the affordable housing. I had to walk out because I kept having a coughing fit. I think everyone was on the verge of either sick or getting sick at AOD this past year.
Yeah.
Craig Nardi and I kept looking at each other across the room and I'm like, and he's doing the same thing. I had to walk out. But I don't know if you knew we were friends or not, but Melissa Anderson, who's on the committee, she's a close personal friend of mine. We were just on the phone earlier. I didn't realize you guys were, we served on the board at Upper State together, and she finds herself at the conferences and me too and all that. So we're good buddies. And I didn't realize you guys were submitting for educational content for Apartmentalize. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. In fact, that's an initiative from every year we have an initiative, but we make sure that throughout the year we receive content for several things. One, several submissions for Apartmentalize, which is super competitive to be able to get approved to be able to speak for one of the sessions. And the other programs that we provide content for are for publications and NAA publications, so articles, and then education, such information for trainings or webinars. And I'm really excited to say that a couple of our submissions were approved. That we just got the word recently. So we're excited to be back on the docket for 2025 at Apartmentalize. It's in Vegas. Hope everyone signs up and attends. It's a great education conference and one of the best of the year.
Oh, for sure. And I know NAA can't necessarily promote it, but we sure can. We sure can. Yeah, quite an amazing keynote this year.
I'm so blown away with who we're having. Share the news.
Yes, we are going to have the GOAT, Simone Biles, this
Greatest of all
year.
time.
That's right. That's right. And I think her message is going to be timely because, like, I'm teaching a class this next week on burnout. And she
Oh.
knows what it's like. And you can get burned out on something that you love.
She took a bold move on exiting out of the games when she decided I need balance. Do you recall? And talk about resilience. We're all so psyched about hearing her. And I mean, already there's so many great reasons to attend Apartmentalize, but then you throw Simone in there and it's just icing on the cake.
Oh, absolutely. And she's someone I've used because she's open and out about having ADHD. And my son, who's 16, he lives with it as well. And, you know, being where we're from, and even I heard my own congressman say, oh, it didn't exist when I was young or whatever. Yes,
You
it
just
did.
didn't have a name for it.
Exactly. And, you know, we're in the Bible Belt. You can't pray it out of them. You can't spank it out of them or restrict it or whatever. And it can be their superpower. So I've used her as an example to my own son to say, look at what is able to be accomplished with this. That's her hyper focus is
Right.
gymnastics. And she put her all into it. You just have to find your equivalent of gymnastics.
Yes. And what is your all?
Exactly. She's going to be great. And I think when she speaks about just her experience and having the strength and the courage to say, you know what, I can't do this right now. It's going to be dangerous for me. I need to take a step back. And people can say what they want to say, but you know, like Mel Robbins says, let them.
Let them. She was wow, such a timely example for others who maybe didn't have the courage to do that or were worried about the fallout or repercussion of that. And what a beacon of light and example for people to say it's okay.
And I think housing providers, we have a lot of situations that we're helping people through, and you can't pull or pour from an empty cup because people come to us for how I still say us. I still have my property management license, but I still say us. They come to us for a variety of reasons for their move. And sometimes it's not necessarily like an exciting thing, like, oh, yay, I got a new job. Sometimes it's really heavy.
Even if it's exciting, it's stressful as heck.
Yes.
It's one of the top stressors in people's lives. But you throw now what our operators have to deal with after going through COVID, people's mental health. Look at the fires in LA. Even we have so many properties in LA with legacy, but even our team members here up in the north where it's so wet, it's hard to imagine a dry climate. But yet we're feeling the impact because of the stress of it all. And it does impact your ability to cope and be there for your team and your residents and your clients. And we're dealing with real factors and pressures on our operators that they've never had to deal with before, where their mental health, there's a lot of violence now that they have to encounter and manage through. Talk about that, but then also throwing on all of the legislative burdens and regulatory issues that they have to comply with that are different, and every jurisdiction is different. And I mean, when you combine all of that, it's incredibly challenging, and everyone needs way more additional support and encouragement than ever before.
Oh yeah, and it's not something you're trained for. It's not something in residents with mental health issues. And there were sometimes I would get a phone call, and the person, and in their reality, you know, two things can be true at the same time. What they're telling me could not be a big deal to me, but it's a huge deal to them. My assistant manager, when I was a manager, I was a baby brand new manager. And when I got to hire my assistant manager, or the assistant property manager, I never referred to her as my assistant because she was not. She was the assistant property manager. It's one of those things that just, she's not your assistant, assistant property manager,
right.
He or she.
Yes.
So I hired for my weaknesses. And at that time, mad people were my weakness. By the end of my career on site, I'm like, bring them to mama.
Oh, you were conflict aversive to begin with?
Yes.
And then your conflict resolution. See, I also thrive in conflict resolution too. but it might not have been my nature early on, but we had to really embrace it and become where we welcome and encourage it. Now, I that's one of the most favorite parts of my.
Oh yeah, because 9 times out of 10, we can solve their problem.
Yeah.
Like, and half the time when they come in and they're super duper upset, I used to work for a manager. She would say, "What's the real problem? What's really going on?"
What's the root? Let's
Yeah.
get to the root.
Yeah. And sometimes it's they had a bad day.
Yeah.
They're
It
human
could be as
too.
simple as that.
Yep. And we have the answers. There's, aside from like crazy rent concessions or sometimes letting them out of a contract without penalty, there are some ways that we can work around within the fair housing laws, of course,
Yes,
but
of course.
to help them through whatever it is that they're going through. And you have to be in it to win it, but in it to solve their issue and to give them a positive experience.
We lead with compassion and empathy. And I'm really focusing a lot right now on kind leadership. So leading with kindness, but firm. So a lot of people misinterpret that. Kind leadership is, I think, the strongest form of leadership and the most effective. And oftentimes, whether it's our team members or our residents, they oftentimes need to just feel heard, and then they can receive the right guidance. And that way it's actually effective. But until you're able to diffuse the defenses and break down the barriers, there wouldn't be the opportunity to move forward until you can do that. And that kind of approach, I find, is to be the most long lasting impact, leading with kindness and that servant leadership style.
Oh, absolutely. And if they're not hearing you, if you're trying to talk to them while they're still in that needing to get it out phase,
You're
you
not
may
going
as
to
well be
get,
talking to them all.
yes, you're not going to get anywhere if you're just going like this.
No. And the same thing I think could be said for meeting with legislators, because not all of we are very fortunate in South Carolina to have representatives and senators who will sit down and listen to us and they agree with us. But, my buddy, John Maudlin, John's from San Diego. He's from California. It's totally different. And you have a lot of opposition like what you guys have in Seattle. And so I think the same thing could be said for meeting with a policymaker who may not necessarily share your viewpoint.
Absolutely. Because you have to be an effective communicator in order for them to receive your message. But they have to also, part of being a great communicator is being a great listener. And so we hope that the people in positions of policy change are going to make sure and do that. And most of the time they are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've seen that too. And I'm going to my first lobby day next week with the VAMA Association. We're members of VAMA. So I sat in on their issues briefing earlier today. And Erica's wonderful, their government affairs director. And she was preparing folks. And that's what I want to tell folks too. If you're going to lobby day, if you're getting involved, there are people who will talk. You don't have to talk at first. As much as I know, you know how much I'm going to say at that lobby day? Probably little to nothing.
And you're the expert.
Right. I'm yielding to the people who are their constituents, who are there, who have their stories from inside their districts. And if I have something pertinent to say, I'll add it. But you can go and not necessarily be a wallflower, but you can go and listen and hear how these conversations take place.
I'm glad you said that, Katie, because if I look back to my early days, I did the exact same thing, and I was very, very nervous. It's natural. It's a foreign environment. It's government. It's very special and revered. And I went along, of course, you have your takeaway document that you can, or the leave behind document for them, but also you can be paired up, which is what we did locally last year. We had a really exciting program that we implemented for the first time. It was the inaugural Emerging Leaders Program for the Washington Multifamily Housing Association. And it's called the Carrie Anderson Emerging Leaders Program. And I have to give a shout out to Carrie because today's her birthday. But here in the state of Washington, she's been incredibly impactful on type of servant leadership and leading by example. And so this program was formed in her honor to establish a mentor and mentee group of members that we can work throughout the year on improving and our management and operations. And I had the privilege of being a mentor to a really fabulous person who is named Tyler Frieden. He's my mentee. He's with Greystar, and he's such a rising star. He was one of the 20 in their 20s for NAA and designation holder of the year for Washington State. But my point is, in this program, we also touched on the legislation and how to get paired up with someone who's done it before. So that's what we did last year for Day on the Hill. We paired people up in groups so that you could go get exposed, take the unknown out of it. And that's the first step. And then you do it and it's repetition and you get more familiar and then you get more comfortable. But you don't have to speak in your first go at it. You can go and learn. And like you said, just this morning, the government affairs gal was educating the team on how it's going to go. And there's so much support that is offered. So you don't have to go in already knowing. You don't wait for that. We wouldn't have any volunteers if that was the case.
Not at all. Not at all. And they're so good. And at that, and on the state level here, I've brought in like our lobbyists from NAA to help. Like I'll say, okay, if you're going to lobby day this year for NAA, here's a Zoom link. We're going to hop on. We're going to discuss the issues before we get there, because sometimes, depending on who's going to be, the role of each individual who's going to have a speaking point is important too. And that's a lot of what we touched on with the Advocacy Academy is who's your scribe, who is this, who is that. So all the roles, and you're able to iron that stuff out before you get to DC so that you're in that issues briefing and it's more of a refresher than you're hearing the information for the first time.
Right. And then you know what speaking part you're going to have. And then so the other folks in the room have their part so that the whole message is delivered, but in a really designed, efficient method.
And one thing too, I've learned this with a Congress member that they sometimes think we're oppositional on some things, but we're really not. I found Todd Whitlow, one of the attorneys with the Whitlow and Brownlee Whitlow, right?
Yeah, he's great.
He's amazing. And we had one member of Congress that was just absolutely against the housing choice voucher program, just absolutely against it. I know. And it's just, he thought it was for folks who were in our country illegally. And we're like, no, it's not.
So he really was uninformed.
He was totally uninformed. And Todd was able to come in and talk. You kind of see who has the most information, but he said 2 words that changed the conversation, and that was, "You're right." And then his defenses just came down because it wasn't about the bill being wrong. It was something inconsequential. But when the congressman heard, "You're right," like, "You're right. We do need to have this conversation," or something to that effect is what Todd said.
Then he was able to receive the information.
Exactly. And I used to yield a lot to Todd and to the other attorneys that were in the room, but having the on-site experience is what they really need to hear. So once folks get comfortable, they don't realize what a wealth of knowledge they are. It might spark a story. "Oh, I forgot about this. I had a resident with this situation or that situation." And then it becomes more personal to the member of Congress and they'll remember it.
Yeah. And on that note, talking about the personal stories and how the specific stories really leave a lasting impression. We're housing providers, but oftentimes we get labeled as the big bad landlords or corporate landlords and owners with our own initiatives. But that's so opposite to what we are in this industry for. And that is to provide quality, affordable, safe housing for everyone at all income levels. And I think that years ago, when you think about affordable housing, you think LIHTC or, a 60% AMI. Well, right now, affordable housing is for all income levels. That's how much of a crisis that we're in. Even in Washington State alone, we need over 1 million homes in the next 20 years. And I mean, we have to adopt programs that are going to reduce the development costs, expedite permitting, and improve zoning, so YIMBY, and also make sure rent control doesn't get adopted. Those are the components. And then beef up all of our programs like the housing choice voucher to help support folks who need it the most, and then that way to provide housing for the folks that are at a different income level but still need to be close to where they work and live and play.
And I think that's important because the housing affordability factor, you shouldn't be able to walk into an affordable community or a conventional community and really tell the difference. Like, these are quality homes that we're providing. There's no subpar building because it's an affordable community.
You can't tell the difference whatsoever. Our buildings have mixed income component, market rate, and either below market rate is what we say, and we have a certain percentage designated. It's the same product. And even if it's a full affordable community, you can't tell the difference now most of the time on what's affordable and what's market rate. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah, because affordable doesn't mean subpar. These aren't subpar humans. These are human beings. We're giving them quality, and I think that's the message that I want to continue to spread and give owner operators the opportunity to voice here that we're here for the same. We all want the same thing. We're really not that different.
Right. Exactly.
For sure. And one thing too, I know we're coming to the end, but another thing that we do with the legislative committee that I want members to know about, so if they have a situation come up in the local level, is the HAP program. Would you be able to speak a little bit about the HAP?
Yes, the HAP program, Housing Affordability Program, is a program that you can apply for funding to help your state's initiatives. I know Washington State and the Washington Multifamily Housing Association has had many years of involvement for applying for a HAP and receiving funds to help fight or pay for the proper tools to help educate our legislators. A lot of it is for pay-per-call programs where we have people calling constituents to make sure they're informed to vote for the right initiatives to help the health of housing. And different jurisdictions around the country can apply and get support that way. Is that what you were talking about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like come up like a motion will be made, or the Ledge Committee has to approve this HAP, and then it goes to the board. Is that the proper process?
Yeah, and I've been on the HAP committee for many years. So there's so much that goes into this. And first and foremost, to be able to request a HAP funding, you already have to do so much research and meat of your request on the why, and also already have had a lot of skin in the game, if you will, on what your efforts have been and what contributions you're doing locally. For us in Washington, it's helped us so much because of the threat of rent control has been strong here over many years, that we've needed it, because even with our strong fundraising efforts, the cost to fund a campaign or a program is astronomical. And, so we really need to be able to have those fundings. But once that request is made, it goes to the subcommittee, who has to evaluate, ask questions, vote, and then it goes to the greater board for a final vote before it gets approved. So there's quite a process, but when those funds are allocated and approved, they make all the difference.
Yeah, so it's important if there's going to be like a ballot initiative, if folks are seeing this on the local or state level in their areas, and they don't have everything, all the tools that they need to fight it, they should start reaching out. Is it April Capone with NAA that they need to reach out to?
I believe it's April, but you make a good point, because what we found, we've got New Jersey, Chicago, Minnesota, Washington, all across the country, Florida, that have fought big initiatives that we have to rally as a country, which is what the National Apartment Association leads, for the support. Because sometimes, and we've seen this before, what gets adopted in California is huge. California, Oregon, watching what gets adopted usually becomes a trickle effect and can affect the entire country. And so that's just such part of the beauty of being part of the National Association and supporting our national effort, because it is, we're in it together.
We are. We very much are. And rent control is interesting. It died. Like, was it Proposition 33
Oh, in
in
California, yes,
California?
that was a
Yeah.
big success.
Yes.
Thank God. We
Yes.
what we have right this year and last year we were successful in thwarting it in Washington State. The Prop 33 news was great that's got halted. What I mentioned came out of the gate already on Monday here locally is House Bill 1217. So we are continuing that work to make sure that it doesn't pass in this, go through for adoption. So.
Yeah. So folks that are domiciled or lived in Washington State, contact your representative and tell them no.
Contact them, sign in a post, give your testimony, make sure they hear from you.
Yes. And we're going to see more calls to action as more legislation that would be detrimental to the industry is introduced in these first few weeks. And it's going to be very important for members to answer those calls to action.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that. Be on alert when you get an email, a text from your government affairs group or your coalitions. That's because they are needing you to take action. Every voice matters. Every action makes a difference. And so be on high alert.
Yes, absolutely. And, just because, I think folks kind of let their guard down a little bit after the election went the way that it did, but that's not the right thing to do, because we may not see some of these things on the federal level, but we're going to continue to see them on the state level.
Yeah, that's so true.
Well, I thank you again for coming on with me. I feel like we could talk all day about
I know
this.
we could. I'm so glad we shared passions, and there's power in unity, and I just get so inspired by the work you're doing, and the more people that can get involved, just the more progress that we'll see, and have health for our industry that we love, and provide so many opportunities for housing and employment for thousands and thousands. So.
Yes,
Thank you,
and
Katie.
likewise to you. And if folks don't follow you on LinkedIn, it's my recommendation that they do, but see what all you're doing
Thank
in
you.
your state for the industry, and it's very much appreciated. Like you said, we're all in this together, and the more powerful our voice is when it's sung in unison, our message.
Yeah, so true.
And I always end my sessions with, because I'm a huge music lover. Do you have a favorite song? Or what, if you don't, what are you listening to right now?
Okay, well, I love music. Of course, I'm very musical as well, and I love that you love hip hop so much, and I can really get into all my hip hop love songs. I'd have to say, and my genres are wide that I love, but over the ages, I always go back to a song by Bill Withers called "Lovely Day." Lovely
Yes.
day, lovely day.
Lovely
And
day.
I
Yes.
love it. I just love that because it's very soulful, but it's also very positive. And I think that it really reminds us to be resilient no matter what challenges we're facing, and that we can feel, have the sun hit us and feel no matter what we're up against, that we're going to have a lovely day, and just keep powering through with resiliency and unity.
I love that. Love that. And thank you again, Sheri, for being my guest today on The Real Spill. I hope you'll come back on sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks, Katie. It's such a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.